Hello, I'm Tracy, and I talk about all things autism, ADHD, and all of the many associated weird and wonderful things that come along with both of those. My aim being to really change and challenge attitudes and hopefully eventually create a society, not me alone, all of us, I'm not going to change society on my own, that is more friendly to difference. And what I want to talk about today, and I really, really would like to know what people think, is the Sunflower Lanyard here in the UK, and also what is done in other countries, which I know very little about. It's brilliant. Of course, it's brilliant. Anybody trying to do something. But I do have a few questions, reservations, ideas for improvement. Of course, I do. Partly, I don't necessarily want to have hidden disabilities. And I also think the way that humans are curious, people look and think, oh, what is it? And I'd rather they had learned about autism and ADHD, or perhaps complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or rejection sensitivity dysphoria, whatever is affecting someone like me in the moment. I'd rather be able to get that out so that people learn, because otherwise I think it's easy to write off a great big group wearing these lanyards because, oh, it's something. So I've written a piece, being me. It's quite long, so I thought I would record it, mainly because I actually just used some hair straighteners and thought, oh, this is an opportunity for recording. So I've called this, Do You Have Anything Else? After a very bizarre incident at Heathrow Airport, which I do think tells us a lot about the human psyche and the way people think, which we probably ought to understand if we're going to ask people to think differently. I'd like to start with a quotation from a famous American psychologist called Theodore Rubin, who said, "We are all of us exceedingly complex creatures, and we do ourselves service in regarding ourselves as complex. Otherwise, we live in a dream world of non-existent, simplistic black and white notions which simply do not apply to life." So, obviously, I am not a famous psychologist, nor am I a psychiatrist. I'm not a philosopher or an anthropologist. But I have studied humans for over half a century and feel that I might know some stuff. I have watched and wondered in both awe and astonishment. Dr. Camilla Pang, who is the author of the book Explaining Humans, she says when she was very young, she asked if there was a manual for humans, and I certainly would have liked one of those. I did know that I seemed to be different, and I knew that I never seemed to fit in no matter how hard I tried. And boy, did I try hard. The people-pleasing that I developed, accompanied by its best friends and no boundaries, and an absence of understanding that I can use the word no, well, they're probably an entirely different discussion for another day. So when I don't understand something or someone, I just try harder. In science at school, I asked them to show me that there was oxygen in the air and to demonstrate how the electricity, whatever that is, was coming out of the plug. They declined. They threw a circuit board at me and asked me not very politely to leave the lesson. I did leave, and I never went back. Despite it being a mandatory subject, I never attended any science classes because I was deemed too much of a problem. Asking questions has continued to be a problem for everyone around me from that day on, so it seems. Science lessons followed swiftly by the maths lessons and then the English lessons. All quickly rejected me. In maths, they wouldn't tell me why there is a table of numbers other than to say that it is useful for life and we need to know it. Certainly some people need to know this, but my question was, why do I? I've only learned very recently that most people operate on a system based on themselves. If they need to know, then that is the answer, which to me is not an answer at all. English I loved, but I also hated. I've been an English teacher for the last 30 years for exactly that reason. If I can figure out this nonsense, then so can you. And many successful and more confident students later, this is one of the only few things that actually I am proud of and think that I did do properly. And if the paragraphs above are a short introduction to the way I think, you are most welcome. Buckle up because that is the tip of the proverbial iceberg. I am the person who points out to you that the highest mountain on earth may be Everest, but the tallest, as in the biggest, is in fact Mauna Kea, which is a volcano in the Hawaiian archipelago of which we only see the top part. I am conscious in the modern world that even using that 5-syllable geographical term may deem me worthy of rejection. But all of this sets the scene for the story I'm about to share. I don't think quite like you might expect, and this means that I feel and see and hear the world differently. I feel and hear and see things with an intensity that can be delightful or it can be debilitating. Am I disabled? Well, it depends on how you look at it. It depends upon where I am and when I am and what I am. Most of all, it depends on you. Dr. Luke Bearden is the Senior Lecturer in Autism Studies at the University of Sheffield. He has published many books and is an advocate for a new understanding of autism and of neurodivergent ways of being in the world. His equation states that it is the environment in which a person is placed that affects or determines the amount of discomfort, disorder, or disability that they experience. Change the environment and not the person, he says, as do many others. But although many people say this and write about this, very little actually does seem to be changing. We are saying lots about changing, but not much is actually changing. How do I know? Well, I belong to an international group of adults who discuss neurodifferences and help and support each other. In this group, we've been careful not to indulge in any judging or criticism and to welcome any views and any voices if they need help and are kindly meant. If the words are not those that some deem acceptable, then we listen and understand the story that is beneath, rather than rejecting or cancelling the person whose story it is. So, my scene is set. You already know that this is something to do with autism and disability. I'm told that the topic needs to be clear early on so that the reader will engage. I am an English teacher and understand how writers use a hook to create suspense and tension. The problem with autism and disability is that they often create a switch off and a shutdown. The audience decides this is not relevant to them, and they leave the building. If trapped and unable to physically leave, then they may express interest, or at least try to listen, but if asked later, like when I was a teacher checking the concepts are understood, the sad truth is that they're not. No matter what I say, and I say lots, people have already decided. They've often decided autism is something else and it is not me. And then they talk about autism, even though I'm still there and can hear them. I'm going, I'm here, I hear you. And even though they know nothing about it. Even more baffling is that most of what is said is delivered as statements, not even questions. You know, so the old favourite, but you don't look autistic, it's never a question. It's used to close down and move on. If autism isn't me, then it's something else. And if it's something else, then it's not relevant here. They apparently know more about what it isn't, i.e. me, than what it is, but seem rather reluctant to ask and learn more. Interesting. So I didn't know how different I am until 6 years ago. I had certainly been wandering around in chaos and confusion for over half a century, trying to fit in and trying to find places to belong and be accepted. When it came to autism, I only knew the stereotypes, which ranged from Forrest Gump to Rain Man, and never in my wildest dreams or nightmares did I consider I might be autistic. Especially a sociable, articulate, spontaneous, fun-loving, public-speaking female who is autistic. Autism was boys, and especially boys in trains, surely. Important caveat here. Sometimes I do wonder if it might be better to have a bit of humility and humour about one's own stereotypes, because I jolly well love trains and timetables. There we go, I said it. I have a copy of Bradshaw's European Manual from the 1800s, which Michael Portillo looks around. I have the European Rail Network Complete Timetable, and I booked for my family to take the new gauge-changing line across the Swiss Alps in the first month of opening. At university, they called me Tracy Train, and wittily said, she knows her timetable. If only one had added on what now ought to be obvious. So, the story that fills in all of those gaps is yet to come, other than to say that my life unravelled completely, and I found some new companions for my journey. But for now, I will try and keep on track. See what I did there? And I'll tell you the story about the Sunflower Lanyard and why I think that I don't want to hide my disabilities. That is what they are. And when I say journey, I'm aware that this is a very X Factor sob story way to describe life in order to garner sympathy and more votes. But when I say journey, it really does mean travel. And when I say travel, it really means life. But again, that is to be explored on another day when I hope that you will join me and we can take a jaunty trip together. And you thought autistic people couldn't use sarcasm, humour and metaphors? My pedantic brain wants to tell you, of course, that I have in fact been using a semantic feel with words that link trains and travel. But since my diagnosis and my subsequent exploration of how wrong I have been about most things, I have learned that people don't like corrections. This is yet another minefield that I only wish I had known about in the first half century of my life. To help someone learn and know more, to me, is the greatest compliment. This would be because they care about me and they want to share knowledge and to protect me from incorrect assumptions or what I think are facts. On this, as with much else, I was totally wrong and I still really don't understand humans. And so, only 1,500 words in and we come to the story. Oh no, well nearly, because another thought popped in. You can probably guess that the ADHD force runs strong with me. Star Wars reference, see? I always tell stories chronologically, and I'd never realised this until my daughter came to a doctor's appointment with me. They allow 5 minutes and just one ailment. I start at the beginning, the 1960s, and go on from there. It never occurred to me there was a reason why I really never get past my O-levels in 1984 and never get a diagnosis. Luckily, my daughter was on hand to point out that I really should start at the end and work backwards if I hope for any symptoms to be heard. Who knew? Although, ironically, this is exactly what I do in most areas of life. I always go to the end first so I can fill my notepad with the myriad of things that I'm going to need to worry about and plan for. So that's what I mean about it's always like planning a big travel trip, simply getting out of the house or even just cataloguing the thoughts. Some people call this catastrophizing. I do not. I call it executive planning. I have a blog, a book, podcast, and some YouTube videos explaining this. I've created all of these, and then, because I struggle massively with rejection sensitivity disorder and speech, I post them and I run away. I may even have sold books, but I'm too scared to look. And so finally, this brings us to the do you have anything else moment. And the reason that I would like to review the way that the Sunflower Lanyard is described and promoted. My fear is that once again we meet the dichotomy, that is the difference between what people say and what they think. If I say autism, what do you say? But if I say autism, what do you really think? Daniel Kahneman, in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, explores the heuristic of what he calls confirmation bias. I think it's a well-known term in psychology, saying what you think is needed. And I think that this may be happening more than we realise. I would like to hear what is really thought and what is really understood, or probably not. As a teacher, I tell students that the most important thing is for me to know what they don't know, because without that I can't help them. Can't fill in the holes if I don't know where they are. And to use a line from Shirley Valentine that's just popped in, sorry, anyone under 50, but I won't do the Liverpool accent, I'll get into trouble for that. How can you know anything if no one has ever told you? I think she's a bit ruder than that when she says it. And blimey, I digressed again. You think it's tiring reading this or listening to this? Imagine what it's like to be me. This doesn't stop when the sun goes down, people. So when you live your life in a maelstrom of past, present and future all at the same time, this time travel doesn't matter to me, but I know it can be exhausting, frustrating and confusing for anyone who gets into the TARDIS with me. So sorry about that. And yet another clue. Hey, come on, Doctor Who references now. Trains, Star Wars and Doctor Who, and no one told me. So I had arrived during COVID at Heathrow Airport. I was fortunate enough to have an EU card because my husband was working in Europe and we could therefore travel much more freely. Although, to be honest, plane loads of people were travelling very freely. The British media had managed to convince the public that this wasn't happening. Again, yet another story for another day. So I arrived when only one terminal was open, and the queues for passport control to enter the UK were around 5 to 6 hours. It was utter chaos. No one had the correct documents available. I, of course, had a folder which contained plastic wallets, which easily showed my vaccine certificates, my COVID tests, my residency documents, and so on and so on. Executive planning, as I said. Some people had come from countries on the red list, and they were being rounded up in the queue. By which point, this was a pretty useless thing to do. And why were they going into quarantine when they'd just been in the queue? Lots on my plane had come from red list places. They just changed airlines in a European airport. I mean, a man was wandering around with a red piece of cardboard, asking anyone if they wanted to come forward, waving it around, going red list, red list. It's like you were going to go, oh yes, me please. Please may I go and be imprisoned in the Travelodge for 2 weeks. Anyway, the disorganisation was so overwhelming that after about 4 hours, I just couldn't cope. I wanted to go to the front and start organising. One queue for those with paperwork in print, one for those who have it on their phones, one for those who have it on their phones but can't find it, and another for those who didn't know they needed it, but still somehow managed to board the plane. And although the noise and the lights were attacking my sensory systems that go very quickly into overload, and although standing for so long was painful, and although my clothes were starting to hurt and my fight or flight was triggered by the sense of being trapped, the main thing that was making me genuinely unable to regulate my emotions was the chaos. The lack of anyone helping or taking control or letting people know what was happening. This level of uncertainty and worry sends my system into a spiral of fear. It's like silence. The lack of certainty fills me with dread, and I start to shake, and I need to rock, and I talk to myself out loud about everything that I can see and hear and feel. Sometimes I become mute, but mainly my emotional regulation comes from attempting to narrate it all away. So I have never done this before or since, but I walked over to a member of staff who was standing underneath the picture of the sunflower, which was emblazoned on my lanyard. I asked for help and asked if there was any way I could get out of this purgatory. The lady called over more members of staff to inspect me, I think. One of them said, well, what do you have? What do I have? Now, I know that the lanyard represents hidden disabilities, but I would prefer that people knew, so they might learn more, be able to recognise better, and because I think that they're always silently thinking to themselves, well, what do you have anyway? So it goes like this. Me. Well, I'm autistic and I'm really struggling in this environment. Them. Or one of them, it wasn't a chorus. Autistic? You don't look autistic. She doesn't look autistic. What's the matter with you? Gets better and better, doesn't it? Me. Well, I just get overwhelmed with everything very quickly and I feel unable to cope. Them. Someone. One of them. It's a long queue and everyone has to stand in it. Do you have anything else? Me. Anything else? Well, yeah. I'm ADHD and have real issues with the rejection sensitivity disorder. Them. Oh, thought that was badly behaved boys, isn't it? Do you have anything else? Me. Well, I'm diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Them. Would you like a chair to take with you in the queue? Or do you have anything else? Me. I'm diagnosed with fibromyalgia and dyspraxia, if they might help. I don't think that they knew, recognised, or understood a single thing about any of these conditions. I know some people don't like the word conditions, but I think that some humans need to make it about themselves. Feel empathy only if they could imagine having the same thing. So, I got out my phone and I showed them a photo of the scan detailing my brain tumour. It's in my pituitary gland and at present does nothing, affects nothing, and may well be an incidental find I will live alongside forever. All of the other things control my life and affect the ways that I feel and see and hear the world differently and more intensely and often painfully. This was what they'd been looking for. The words brain tumour conjured up their worst fears. This could be cancer. This could be me or my family. This could be terminal. And so I was offered a wheelchair, which I declined. I was escorted to the front of the queue with faces looking like they felt sorry for me, or maybe for themselves, on the off chance that this might happen to them. The Sunflower Lanyard is the most marvellous idea and brings comfort and care to many people. And if this is enough for someone to be helped in a difficult environment, then brilliant. I would like to delve deeper and launch an identification recognition course that helps people understand difference simply because it is different. In his book Factfulness, Hans Rosling asks people to be prepared to be wrong and to question the world and learn new things with awe and wonder. I don't want the sympathetic nods and sighs of people who see the lanyard and have no idea about who I am and what I experience. I would like my hidden disabilities to be seen and heard and understood and accepted. I don't want sympathy for the unknown. I want accommodation and understanding for what is known. Change the environment and not the person. If you've joined me today, then thank you so much. If you've already met me, you know that my website, feelingtheworlddifferently.co.uk, is where you can find me and contact details or comment here. And I really like to start something with people that will join me across the world, really, so that we can keep the sunflower idea going, but actually help it to represent more accurately for those of us who feel the world differently. Thank you for joining me today.